Well, welcome. Thank you for coming to NS Meetup. I believe this is our 38th NS Meetup. Quick show of hands, who's at their first NS Meetup tonight? All right, round of applause from the newbies here. Thanks for coming. If you guys don't know, NS Meetup meets every first Wednesday of the month. We talk about open source, we talk about iOS programming. If you're interested in speaking, my name's Steve, I'm the host. Or if maybe you don't want to speak but you want to hear about a particular topic, we can also do that. So please let me know. On Twitter, it's at NS Meetup. If you guys have any questions, please come find me. There's plenty of drinks. There's beer, there's Coke, there's water, there's whatever you want. There's recycle right there on the end. If you could, recycle your bottles. The restrooms are right in by the elevator where you came in to the left. So if you guys need to get up during the talk, please feel free to move around. It's not too particular in here. What else do we got? I think that's it. That's all the basic needs. All right, with that, I want to turn over the microphone to tonight's speaker, Ryan Nystrom.
Hey everybody, so I'm Ryan Nystrom. I'm an iOS engineer over at Instagram. And tonight we are going to kind of tell the story about 3D Touch, talk about 3D Touch, and look at how we at Instagram integrated 3D Touch and what we think of it. So just kind of a quick overview of some of the stuff that we're going to talk about. We go through some demos. Got a couple demos for you guys in Instagram, out of Instagram. We're going to walk through the actual API, talk about what 3D Touch is, how it works. We're going to discuss 3D Touch in Instagram, like I mentioned. And then at the end, we're also going to share a little bit of data that we've collected about 3D Touch in Instagram and just kind of go through what we think of it, kind of reaction now that we've had one of the successes deliver. It's been like a little over a month and a half. Just kind of a reflection of like where we're at, what we think of it, and where we're going. So before I jump into things, I'm going to share a quick video that was really, really exciting for us.
We've been able to bring in some of our great third-party developers over the past couple of weeks to see what they could do with 3D Touch, and their feedback has been phenomenal. Dropbox makes it easier now, right from your home screen, to get at your recent documents, upload photos, search your Dropbox. On Facebook, I can update my status or check in right here from my home screen. With WeChat, I can take one of their site videos, just like this, and Instagram, now they've really gone to town. I can jump right into my activity feed, or in here, with these little picture thumbnails. Well, of course, I can peek right in. If I want to favorite or like one, I can do it just like this. Or if there's a person I follow, and I want to see all of their photos, well, I can, of course, dive deeper and pop right in and take a look at these great images. It's just such a natural way to browse Instagram. And of course, they even made it play videos automatically. So no matter what you like to do with your phone, 3D Touch makes it better than ever. I think you're going to love it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig. All right, so that demo was pretty cool, but let's actually look at what we've built. So, screen sharing Instagram here. I'm going to kind of walk through the different 3D Touch integrations that we added to the app. So the first one that we did, we're calling it our profile peek. So one of the APIs that we'll get into is peek and pop. It's kind of a way to get a preview of content without actually committing to the full screen experience. So on here, if I press a little heart on the header there, I pull up somebody's user profile, loads some images, follow status, a little bit of data about their account, and then I can swipe up to look at some actions that I can take. I can unfollow them, send it through direct, whatever I feel like doing. The same user peaks also work on comments. So if you see somebody tagged in a comment right there, I can press on it, and pull up their user profile again. Now we added more than just user profile peaks. We also added photo peaks. So if I load this is the activity screen of people that I'm following, so stuff that they're doing. If I want to look at, say, this picture on the upper right, this guy, can't really see it too well, so I tap on it, and then I can look at it. That's cool, go back. We actually added photo peaks, so that instead of tapping on it, I can just press and expand, and even do autoplay on video. So if I wanted to kind of browse through this following screen, it's just a matter of tapping straight through all this stuff. And then the same works on profiles. So looking at somebody's profile, happen to be on my own, and I want to look at a photo here, or a video, I can press a little harder on that video, and it plays. Now the other part of peek and pop is that you can press harder after you've presented it, and do what's called, so the blurry view there is called the peek, and then when you press a little harder into it, that's called a pop. And the same works with users, so I can look at this, press a little harder, and go straight into it. Now the other thing that we added in Instagram, which I'm super excited about, are quick actions. So looking at the home screen here, yeah, there we go. If I find the Instagram icon, I can press on this. Thanks, Arnaud. Get rid of those notifications. This is our pre-release icon here. So I press on our icon, I can pull up quick actions. We added new posts, activity, search, and direct. And what these do are probably pretty self-explanatory. I tap on new post, takes me straight into the creative workflow. I tap activity, straight to my activity feed. And lastly, direct, opens straight to our direct messaging product. Now the last one that we have, I'm actually super excited about, because let me show you the normal workflow. So the app opens, meta, and I want to search for something. And I want to search for something. I tap on the Explore tab, it's the one with the little search icon, and I have to tap on the search box up here. So, it's not the most cumbersome user experience, but it's a couple steps. So say I'm at like a cold start of the app. Let's just kill it. And somebody tells me their Instagram handle and I want to follow them. Well, it's a matter of just press, scroll up to search, opens, keyboard focuses, find somebody, tap, done. Super, super easy. So before we get into the API for how 3D Touch works, or how you can use 3D Touch, let's talk quickly about the actual hardware and software behind this, and what makes this possible. So, we have a new iPhone 6s. What is in a 6s, and a 6s Plus? The first thing with the 6s is the new display. And not only the display, but what powers the display. CPU and the GPU. 6s, 6s Plus have an incredibly powerful GPU. If you ever notice when you're using 3D Touch, or you've seen 3D Touch, how the background gets kind of blurry, but it's not like a static image of a blur. That's like a live blur. If you see a video playing in the background, or you see some animations happening in the background, that they will still animate and play in the background while the blur's there. And if you try something like that on an iPhone 4, I don't know if anybody remembers back when iOS 7 came out, there were all these hacks to get like live blurs working, and they were all so terrible. Nothing ever worked. But with the 6s, with this more powerful GPU, we can actually get this thing working. The next bit is the capacitive sensors. This is what actually measures when you press on the screen. I have literally no idea how this works. I'm not a hardware person, but I press hard on it and it tells me how hard I press. One of the coolest things about it though, it's not like on the watch, if you force press on something, you get a little bit of accuracy where you can kind of press hard. But with 3D touch, I can show it again, or I'll show it again actually in the demo a little bit later. The sensitivity, the level of sensitivity and accuracy with how hard you can press on something is kind of mind-blowing. If you use peek and pop on something and you get it in that in-between state, I mean, it's crazy how little you can touch. You can totally control it. And the last piece, not necessarily relevant to 3D touch, but part of the experience is the Taptic engine. This is what, if you use an Apple Watch and you ever get an alert, notification, it gives you like a little buzz. It's not like an overpowering buzz, but just like kind of gets your attention. Well, that same sort of engine is in the new 6S and 6S Plus. And these are activated whenever you press on something that can be peeked and popped, or if you use a shortcut item. The only downside is there's no public API, so you can't actually trigger this yourself. You have to use one of the peek and pop APIs. I think there's somebody out there kind of got into the guts of it and made it work, but buyer beware. All right, and lastly, before we get into the API, we're going to go through some terminology, because there's a lot of words if you ever dive into peek and pop. There's force, pop, 3D touch, peek, preview, shortcut, quick action, and commit. It's a lot of words, but it turns out most of them mean pretty much the same thing. It's really just marketing. So whenever you hear pop, think of commit. Whenever you hear peek in code in the API, you're going to be using the word preview. 3D touch is called force. I don't know if you were watching the keynote, you might have heard Craig Federighi kind of slip, and he was like, force to 3D touch. In code, it's all force. And then lastly, quick action is actually in code shortcuts. So, in my one gripe with this, if you've been doing iOS for even like a month, you've probably used navigation controllers. Or even if you've done like computer science, you have stacks, and you push on the stack, you pop off the stack. Here, when you are going forward, when you are pushing a view controller, they're calling it a pop. That drives me crazy. The first time I read this documentation, you have no idea. I was just sitting there like, this literally doesn't work. This doesn't make any sense. But just call it a commit, or a push if you really want, because that's what it's doing. All right, so quick actions. These are the things on the home screen. To use quick actions, there's two types. So you have static actions and dynamic actions. Static actions you define in your info plist. You can have up to 4 of them. And essentially, they're always there. They don't change. You don't update them. They're not mutable. They just show up. So if you have an app that's fairly simple, say you always have a workflow that's like create a new post or write a new note or open latest messages, that's totally fine. That works great. Dynamic actions, you have full control of. You can configure them. You can mutate them. You can add them. You can remove them. In Instagram, we only use dynamic actions, and the main reason is because when you're logged out, we don't want to show you options to create posts. And when you're logged in, we don't really want to show you the option to log in. The only downside to doing this is that the first time you install the app and you haven't opened it yet, you don't actually get any options. But as soon as you open the app, then something's going to happen. And then you log in, and we swap all of the preview items. So it works pretty well. So to actually use these, you have to create these objects called UI application shortcut item. See, shortcut, not quick action. To configure these, you are required to have a title and a type. The type is essentially a string, a key. Whenever you tap on something, on one of these preview items, you get a different app delegate event, and it'll give you this type so that you can kind of figure out what happened. So whenever you tap create new post, we get this create new post type, and then we can take you through the create new post workflow. So present those view controllers, do whatever we need to do. You can also add a subtitle. This is optional. You don't have to have it. We don't have any yet. Looking into it. But you could imagine, I think they work on mail and messages, but like under direct, we could have something like view latest message from Kevin or something like that. And that's totally dynamic. We can change it so we can get a push notification and we can update those items. The last bit is the icon, which we're basically mirroring our tab bar icons. Not required, but I think it's super helpful. Yeah. All right, peek and pop, which is probably my favorite part of 3D Touch. Super, super useful. We're going to run through some of the architecture, and there's a lot of moving pieces, but we'll go kind of in depth on some of it. So the first player is your view controller. So everybody's probably used view controllers if you worked on iOS. With your view controller, your controller registers when a 3D touch can happen on it. And essentially, when you register that, you give it a delegate, and you say, this delegate is going to be responsible for handling that touch. So this is a preview delegate. And the preview delegate is going to receive events about when a 3D touch happens. And the delegate's going to determine when a touch is allowed to happen and who is going to be presented, or what is going to be presented. The last piece is what actually gets presented, and this is the preview controller. Now, in the Apple documentation, this is usually supposed to be the same controller that you would push onto like the nav stack or present. Doesn't have to be, and we'll kind of touch on options that you have there. One thing to note is that when you're in like this preview mode, there is 0 interaction allowed, which is kind of hard because a lot of times you're going to be pushing views that have buttons, that have like images, things that you can tap on, but they won't work. Instead, you have this preview actions API, which is that when I swipe up, you can have a list of up to 3, maybe 4 actions. So we do things like and send it direct. So let's kind of walk through some of the preview controllers that we use in Instagram. So the first one that I demoed was our user preview controller. We created a new object, this IG user previewing handler. This is our delegate. That's going to receive events and data about when a 3D touch happened. And it's going to figure out which user item was touched, and then we'll push on an IG user preview controller. So in this instance, in the demo up here, a piece of text gets touched. It's actually an attributed string. We figure out the attributes on that string, decide if there's a user there. If there is, go ahead, push this controller. Otherwise, it just returns no. So similar for posts and videos. So we have this IG feed thumbnail previewing handler, a little bit of a mouthful. This will receive, just like the user will receive a touch, will determine if a post was touched, if it's a video, if it's a photo, do some special stuff, and then return a thumbnail preview controller. And that thumbnail preview controller is what actually handles like video playback. Again, it's got like the preview items, and we can actually like determine if you, or how long you looked at it, or if you looked at it. So we can actually figure out if people are using it. The last example is kind of interesting. So if you look at this interface up here, you notice that there's both users and there's photos. Now we already did the work to create controllers and delegates for users and for photos, but we need to provide a different delegate to handle this and to actually like search this interface. Now we could merge all of that code into one big master delegate and controller, but that's going to be gross and unmaintainable. So what we did instead is we just took these delegates and controllers that we already built this like master controller that we give both of those delegates to, and then it just kind of forks based on which data it's found. That's just the composition pattern, essentially. So super, super simple example of it. But it ended up, we ended up with a controller that's like 10 lines of code and just reuses what we've already got. So those are the players in handling 3D touch. But how do you actually figure out, when you tap on the screen, what was tapped? So when an actual 3D touch happens, essentially all you're given is a point. So I press on this image in the top center, in the center of it, and this 3D touch infrastructure says, here's your point, tell me if a touch can happen, figure it out. So for us, the UIKit APIs actually make this super easy. So we can take this point and we can turn it into a view. We take that view and then we ask our table or collection view, which is what makes up majority of Instagram, the index path for that view. And then we simply take our collection of data, our posts, and we figure out the posts at that index path row. Super simple. And then from that post, we can configure a user or a post previewing controller. So let's look at an interesting kind of edge case. So this is the bottom, this is the tab bar, and you notice we've got these photos here. These photos are under the tab bar, right? With the previewing API, you have to give it what's called a source rect. So it's essentially, give me the origin of what was touched. And under the hood, what it actually does is it takes a screenshot of the view in that rect, and then uses that screenshot to do that kind of blurry transition up into the peak. But for us, if we just, say I tap this airplane right here. If I just tap this airplane, and I give it the frame of that airplane, it's going to take a screenshot of that. So as soon as that transition starts, it's going to flash right on top of the tab bar. It's going to be gross. But this is super easy to solve. We just cut out the tab bar. And what you end up with is a pretty seamless transition right there at the bottom. No flicker. Looks natural. And that's all just using the source rect and a little tiny bit of math. We actually have, if you ever find a post with a really long comment, there's a small bug right there, you can see it flicker. Kind of annoying, but it's gonna be fixed. All right, so before I mentioned the controller that is pushed when you're doing a preview is supposed to be the same controller that would be presented if you were to just tap on that item. Which works in really, really simple cases. So this is on the left, this is Apple's photo app. So if I just press on that photo, if I just tap on the photo, it's gonna just push that whole photo as the view controller onto the nav stack. So if I can peek on that view controller, we can just reuse the same one. It's just a big photo. I'm gonna play that one more time. There's another part of it that's important. The other part, when you've peeked and then you press harder to pop into it, the default API has this kind of squishy, springy animation. I'm gonna play it again. Say when, so right here. Big kind of squishy. To us, that's not very Instagrammy. And we just kind of wanted to transition into the view. So instead, there's a callback on your delegate that's that a view controller is going to be committed. So instead, we kind of just hijack that event and take the nav controller that you were just on, and we just push our view controller on top of it. It works out pretty well. I'm still not the biggest fan of that whole commit API. I think the controller that you are presenting in a peak should be kind of a slimmed down version of what you're going to actually present. Because I think for most cases, your view controllers have buttons, you have gestures, you have all this other stuff. And if you're just presenting that controller, you can't do any of it until you peek into it. So for us, if you see the user view there, we just kind of rearranged it and put just the latest 6 photos. We put the stats on the bottom, made it super simple. It's just a slimmed down version of our user view. It actually saves on data as well, because instead of requesting, I think, 15 or 18 images for your profile feed. We only need 6. So we can save a little bit of bandwidth there. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about are custom gestures. So this is essentially, Apple's got an API so you can respond to force on your views without using the peek, pop, or the shortcut APIs. Now, we don't use this in Instagram yet, but we played around with it a little bit, and it's pretty cool. So we're kind of walk through and give an overview of what that is, and I built kind of a simple demo here as well. So key players, there's force. This is a property on UI Touch. It's essentially a float, and it's going to tell you how hard you're pressing on something. And to determine how hard that actually is, it also gives you a maximum possible force. Now, every time that I've used this value is always 6.66 repeating. I don't know exactly why this exists, but if you look at the header for UI Touch, it actually says maximum possible force with this input mechanism, which the conspiracy theorist in me is saying that there's other stuff out there that you can do force presses with. Maybe it's pencil, maybe it's some special trackpad, who knows. But essentially, if you want to determine how hard you're pressing, just take force divided by maximum possible force. There you go, done. And the other part about this, which I think is kind of important if you're thinking about doing some custom gesture stuff, is this still works with multiple touches. It's just UI Touch, just like anything else. So if you've got a couple fingers on the screen, you get force values for all of it. And it's all unique. It's not one level of pressure. So I've really wanted to actually make a little piano or music app or something, because you could rest all 4 fingers on the screen, but then only play a sound when you press on it. And you could do multiple fingers at once. It'd be kind of cool. Totally possible though. All right, so little demo. And this is a bare bones demo. It's not very exciting. It's a red square. So I set this up with a custom gesture recognizer, it's on GitHub. It's just on a gist, but I'll post it in the meetup afterwards. So I'm doing 2 things. When I press on this square, I'm taking the force, the maximum possible force, and I'm figuring out how hard I'm pressing on it. The other cool part is I am using Facebook Pop, and using their spring physics can change the 3D transform on this in response to my touch based on the velocity of my touch. So if I'm out here and I press real hard real quick, I get kind of a cool spring. But now, say I press it in a bit and then I press hard, not very much spring. This demo is 20 lines of code. Super, super simple. But these APIs are incredibly powerful. And like I said earlier about the sensitivity of this, you can see how jumpy it is because my animations are terrible. But it's responding to every little tiny change in force and pressure on the screen. I'm going to put this demo up on GitHub as well. I'll make sure the links go out for that. All right, so the last bit. So some data. So we put a little bit of analytics in Instagram because we just wanted to see great, we've got it out there, people are using it, let's see how they actually use it. So we've got this metric we're calling peak and pop source. This is essentially where you came from when you activated a peak. And I think what's kind of cool, user profiles is the highest, which is interesting because you actually have to dive into somebody's profile to use this. So that's actually probably just using peaks on photos in people's grid. The next is explore, which is again another grid photo experience. The third one is kind of interesting. So the third one is following. I'm actually going to bring up my screen share here again, just so I can show you what interface that is. So I've got the app open. To get to following, I tap on the activity tab, and I need to swipe over. So this is that screen we were looking at earlier. It's not the easiest interface to get to, and to us, it's not like where people are probably spending most of their time, you know? Feed is like where you've got all this content from people that you're following. But what's fascinating is that the third highest used 3D Touch is this other interface that's a little bit more varied. And what that tells us is that by integrating 3D Touch, we just make it way easier for people to actually explore all of this different content and also pull up profiles. So that's pretty cool. It's exciting to see that this new technology is bringing life to one of these interfaces. The next little bit of data that we've got is this is just our shortcuts, which this isn't probably a terrible surprise. People get push notifications, they want to see what it is. So activity. Next we've got direct, our new posts, our search, and poor pathetic little login, which we have sessions that last a long, long time, so we don't require people to log in over and over again, so that kind of makes sense that it's teeny tiny. And like I said earlier, they're all dynamic, so you don't actually get any 3D Touch shortcuts when you first install the app. So that kind of makes sense. And by the way, don't do the math on those percentages. There's a small little bug about logging. It does add up to 100, just leaving part of it out. The distribution is like that, though, I promise. So next steps. What are the next steps for us? What are the next steps for 3D Touch in Instagram? Well, I think by looking at some of the data, which is very, very early, I mean, we've only had these phones for a little over a month, we already see value in this. So we want to make sure that we're investing in it. We want to add more peaks and pops. We want to even maybe explore what custom 3D Touch gestures can bring to the app. Because there's a lot of cool stuff we could do. We could add this to direct, we could add this to search, we could make hashtags that you can peek on. There's a lot of really cool, exciting stuff. But one important thing that I think is worth noting is that you shouldn't go crazy. Just because this is cool, you shouldn't go crazy with it. Why is that? This only works on the 6S and the 6S Plus. We, and likely any other app out there, still has a significantly large user base on older phones, which this does not work on whatsoever. You can't even call the APIs to get them to work, unless you did some crazy hacks, which I don't think work because the thing is so tied to the actual infrastructure of the touch. The other bit is there's an accessibility concern. You shouldn't be putting important features behind this 3D Touch because there are people that don't want to necessarily be pushing on their screen. You buy this $800 phone, you probably don't want to be jamming your thumb into it as hard as you can. And the other part of it is that there are some people that can't do that. iOS is known for its incredible accessibility options. I think that we should pay attention to that. Treat 3D Touch as a way to add delight and surprise to your apps. Don't hide core features behind it. So, we went through some demos, talked about the API, explored it a little bit, talked a bit about 3D Touch and Instagram, and then went over some data. And I think bottom line is that 3D Touch is awesome, and it brings value to our app. And hopefully you can look into it and explore it because I think that the technology is incredible and it's a lot of fun to use and it brings a lot of value. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for coming out, and I'm going to open it up for questions. Yeah.
Can you share any information on how many people with 6S devices are actually performing some of those actions?
Can I share any information on how many people are with 6S
What
are
percentage
using?
of 6S users are actually using 3D Touch?
No, I can't. We don't have the best idea. It's a good number. It's a lot of people. Yeah.
Hey, just wondering, is it possible to use 3D Touch to do custom user interactions outside of the peek and pop and such?
Oh yeah. So the
And have you experimented with that concept?
yeah. So the little demo I showed you there, it's just a subclass of UI gesture recognizer, and when you get UI touches, you get this force value And so then you can do whatever you want. You can change things in 3D space. You could change the volume on your, whatever's playing. You could do anything. Yeah.
Can you do 3D touch and movement so you can see like a game type thing or whatever?
Can you do 3D touch and movement? Totally. Yeah, it's just a plain old UI touch. It's not a new thing. You still get the point, the location of your touch. Just you get this additional data about force.
So the force can change as you move?
Yeah. And it will. I mean, when I'm using this, the numbers are kind of bouncing all over the place. Really, you have to take the force divided by the max force to get an idea of like how hard it's being pressed, because it's going to change like crazy. Yeah.
I have like two questions. So first is about explorability. So how do you think if I add a 3D touch to my app that users would get to know what elements actually respond to 3D touch without just doing it, shooting in the dark? And the second thing is what you're showing could have easily be achieved by long presses as well, right? So what's the difference?
So the two questions: explorability, discoverability of 3D touch, and why not just use long press? Both good questions. This is going to sound really corny, but 3D touch adds another dimension of interaction. And I mean that literally, because, for instance, with Instagram, if you're on the feed and you long press on a username, we open the comment interface and then pre-filled with that person's username. With 3D touch, we can add another level of interaction on top of that to be able to press on that and then see the peak. So it's just like it's another option, essentially. The discoverability is really interesting. That's probably my biggest concern with it, and that's another reason why I advocate to not put primary features behind it, because it's not the easiest thing to find. And if you add 3D touch, you really should add it everywhere. Like if you have an app with 5 tabs and you only add it to the first tab, it's going to be really confusing, because as you're navigating through the first tab and you're getting this 3D touch, you go to other tabs and now it doesn't work, and you're just kind of like, well, I don't know what to do. Yeah.
Thanks for presenting. Question, so how many quick actions can you have, and have you guys done any sort of user testing to see there's like a magic number of how many you should have?
So how many quick actions can you have? So the cap is 4, and the way it works, you can have up to 4 static items, and then you can also add dynamic items. If you add both, static always shows up, and dynamic is kind of a first in, first out. So if you start adding dynamic items to your shortcuts, static show up, and then your dynamic kind of get pushed around. So it caps at 4. As far as determining the ideal number, I don't think there necessarily is an ideal number. I would say if you can, use all 4. If it makes sense. If you have 4 different workflows that you can make it easier to get into, I don't see any harm in using 4. I mean, ideally, you would want to put the most useful or the highest used closer to the app icon, just because it's less reach. But I don't think it's the end of the world. Yeah.
So the HID document for the 3D touch, it says that you can think about using long press for lower devices. But did you guys think about having a sort of a mechanism for lower devices, a preview mechanism for the lower devices?
Yeah, we thought about it. There's a couple of problems. One, if you try and replicate what 3D touch is doing, specifically the peek and pop, you've got this fully blurred background with all these animations. We still support the iPhone 4, and we'll melt the thing if we try and do that. So that's not an ideal situation. We made sure not to add any functionality that is core to the app with 3D touch. It's more of in code, it's called a preview, and that's exactly how we treated it. It's a way to get a preview of the content or the person without actually navigating into it. And for low-end devices, both Apple's design guidelines and our kind of philosophy is just treat it as a normal tab. Yeah.
You were saying earlier, like, that you can't really hack 3D Touch, but let's say you could. And if you could, what would you like to see out of 3D Touch that isn't already included?
So if you could hack 3D Touch, what would you like? What would I like to see included? You're talking about on devices that don't support it, or just if you could get into the guts of
If
it?
you could get into the really bare bones of everything that's going on there. Like the Taptic engine or any of that you'd like to see.
Yeah, I think the engine would be the one thing I'd like, because there's probably some cool stuff either through, like if you could be using the app and you get an in-app notification, we could give you a little buzz. That'd be kind of cool. As far as what you can do with 3D Touch, the hacking the API comment was more about like supporting it on older devices. That's kind of impossible. Really, with the addition of force metrics on the UI touch, you can pretty much do whatever you want. I've seen people do all sorts of little hacks and demos with it. You have full control. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we were talking about the pop animation, you didn't like that for Instagram. It sounded like you sort of did a hack to get rid of it, but can you support doing like a transitioning delegate to do your own kind of animation in there, or?
You can't. That's originally what we were hoping for. So if you could imagine having, actually, saying imagine, I can just show you. So let's say that I peek on this person's profile. When I pop into it, most of those UI elements are still there. What would be awesome and kind of pipe dream would be to actually press on this, and when I press harder, move those elements where they end up, which I think would be pretty cool. But right now, the API is pretty locked in on just, we're going to push without animation on top of the navigation stack that you came from.
Just one more.
Yeah.
Does Storyboard allow for any of this to be hooked up, or does it all have to be done through code?
Does Storyboard allow you to do this? I have absolutely no idea. I don't think I've used a Storyboard in a long time. I don't know.
Xcode 7.1.
In Xcode 7.1 you can. Yeah.
So people have been hacking. The original sensor was a Fingerworks, and they were providing a silhouette for the finger.
Mm-hmm.
And I think since iOS 8, you didn't have to hack into it to give you, I think, like 4 different radius values.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, have you compared the radius values with the force values?
That's a good question. So for those of you that don't know, when you do a touch gesture, you can still get, is it radius? Is that what it's called? You can basically get some sort of measurement on how much of your finger is touching the screen. So you might be able to use that as an idea of like a little touch versus a big touch. Have we explored the correlation between radius and force? No. But that would be pretty interesting. I imagine it's pretty closely correlated, but seeing the sensitivity of the actual force, and knowing that I can also just gently mash my whole hand against the screen, I wouldn't bank on the radius being a guarantee of how hard the screen's being pressed. But I think you probably could find some sort of happy middle ground if you were to do, say, a custom 3D touch gesture and then want to give backwards compatibility to older devices by using that radius thing. I bet you could probably find something there. Yeah.
Have you tried, in order to get those elements to fly down when you finally pop it, have you tried a custom UI view transition with the force values that they seem to be using for peaks and pops?
So for, sorry, let me make sure I'm understanding. So if you're saying like to do this little bit or the afterwards?
Yeah, so supposedly you could do that just by writing your own custom view transition.
Yeah. In theory, you could rewrite the entire Peak-Pop API. That's just a lot more code than I wanted to write. Yeah. I think the API is pretty good.
Do you know what those force values are? Where peak happens and where pop happens?
Yeah, so the gesture recognizer that I put up on GitHub has about as close as I could get. It's about, so there's a delay. So there's two parts. So if you're using a custom touch, if you drop a feather on your phone screen, well, that actually activates a touch, you will get force readings. So what you have to make sure you do is add some sort of like delay, which I estimate is about like a 10% of the force, so that you can still touch scroll views, tap, do like normal tap events and all of that stuff. But the actual peak gesture activates at around 20-25% of the max possible force. Yeah. Back here.
So working on a team with force touch, one of the things that I find annoying is that there's no way to simulate it. I was wondering if you guys, and not everybody on our team has a device that supports 3D touch, so have you guys found any like clever internal APIs that you can like abuse to simulate 3D touch or anything like that?
Unfortunately not. I wish there was. That's I believe one of our team members opened a radar for that because it's that's frustrating. You don't want to buy if you have a team of like 18, 19 people like we do at Instagram, you don't want to buy 20 iPhone 6S's just so that everybody has the ability to work on this. But if there's a bug or if somebody wants to take the opportunity to play with it, they should be able to. Unfortunately, there's not. For those of you that don't know, you can't use 3D touch or force touch at all in simulator. You can on the watch simulator, which is irritating. But open a radar, let people at Apple know, because I think that would be super valuable. Yeah.
How did you notify users that you added force touch to your application?
How do we notify users that we added force touch? The Apple keynote was super helpful. As far as like onboarding new users, we didn't do anything. Essentially just word of mouth and people kind of accidentally stumbling on it. Like I said, it doesn't provide core functionality, so we don't necessarily want to force people to have to use it or need to use it. It's sort of a pleasant, delightful feature more than core. Yeah.
So a normal interaction, peak and then pop is like 50%. At your 50% force is peak, and then if you do the whole, it's pop, right? Would it make sense to, do some kind of a custom thing to add more stops in between? For example, add 2 or 3 layers on that. Do you think it would ever, or would that be a good user experience in any case?
So the question is, would it be a good user experience? So with peak, you press once and then you press hard again. That's how you get the pop. Would it be a good user experience to add additional steps? I don't really think so. I think that the pushing twice is a little, I don't want to say awkward, but a little weird to press, because you actually have to press and then dampen while not letting go of the screen and then press again. Sort of like force or to require people to do that would be kind of annoying. It might be cool with some kind of like Easter eggs or just like little bits of extra functionality. But as far as like core features, I think that might be a little frustrating, especially dealing with like the accuracy and the level of the press and stuff.
Yeah, let me give a small example. So if you're looking at someone's profile and you peek to view it, and then do one more step to quick reply, and do a full step to actually look at the whole set of replies.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, so like with different stages offer different sort of actions that you can take. The hard part with it is that with peek and pop specifically, the view that you peek is kind of locked down and you can't interact with it. So you'd have to build your own custom thing. I don't know off the top of my head, but I would imagine that it's within the realm of possibility to make something cool with that. But with the default peek and pop, I think it's pretty good as is. I think adding additions to it might be a little cumbersome. Yeah.
Does the custom touch events, would it allow like doing a response immediately after that custom event? So if you did a press like swipe, could you immediately go into like show a responding UI, like to do like a post, like a new post, instead of having you have one element that says create a new post, instead do a custom, events.
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, build your own custom gestures and at certain thresholds or at using different actions with the gesture, take different actions or do different things.
Well, a common thing would be like, a common movement is to swipe to delete on a message. I mean, but if you could do a response.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally possible. In fact, I believe Pinterest did something similar. They've got like a long press and it shows that sort of little fanned out menu. They did something similar with Force Touch or 3D Touch. Jeez, I did it. Where you can 3D touch on something and get those icons up and then kind of move your finger to them. So yeah. No, I mean, you can really do anything. With the custom gestures, you can do whatever you want. Yeah.
So I was wondering, do you think 3D touch would kind of make this confusion with long press? Because when you have two of them together, let's say, so I found my fingers still look 3D touch happy, like, So would you recommend not using it at all if you already have like a functionality that uses long press?
So would you recommend not using 3D touch at all if you already have long press? I think it's still useful. I mean, we do. So for username tags in feeds and comments and stuff, you long press on it, it puts the username in the comment box. If you press hard on it, it shows a preview of it, which I think is, in my humble opinion, a really great experience because it gives you functionality without having to do anything different than press a little bit harder. Yeah.
You think people with the condition known as sausage fingers might have an issue who like naturally just, because some people are just kind of aggressive on the phone. Is it cumbersome to some people? Like they're automatically getting these peek and pops like when they don't want to?
Yeah.
Is there a way to disable that?
So the question is if you are not the most delicate with pressing your phone, could this impose a problem? Yes, there's a setting in your phone's accessibility settings to completely disable this thing. You can even toggle the sensitivity level. There's light, medium, and hard, where if you put on hard, you really have to like almost break your screen to get this stuff to activate. I would respect the system settings. I mean, you have to. You don't really have an option. But if somebody has 3D touch turned off, that's great. They can turn it off and they can use it however they want. I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned with providing 3D touch and having people mess it up, because if they mess it up and they don't really like using it, they do have the option to just turn it off entirely. Yeah.
In accessibility in the system settings, there's an adjustment for 3D touch. Does that alter the 6.66 value that you mentioned?
It does not. No, it's still the same value. So the question's like, in that accessibility menu, you have light, medium, hard. Does that affect the max possible force? No. It's still, well, in what I've seen, still 6.66. It just changes the actual force value when you press on it. It'll change that. It's all under the hood, kind of hidden away from you. It still works as expected. But don't use 6.66 for repeating, because apparently that'll change. Yeah?
Does the custom gestures work at the home screen icon level as well?
That's a great question. Do custom gestures work at the home screen icon? No, definitely not. Only shortcuts work on the home screen. Yes? Yeah.
Can you actually disable 3D touch for certain apps, or is it just like a system-wide?
Oh, good question. Can you disable 3D touch for certain apps? I don't think so. I think it's system-wide. That would be an interesting feature, though. Like for instance, if somebody just kind of went crazy with 3D touch and put it in every single interface, maybe turn it off. But no, you can't. Sorry. Yeah.
So this question is about the contents of the preview. So I presume that the contents of the preview has to hit that sweet spot of making, like for example, if you have a catalog of items you want to sell and you want to show some extra information which makes it interesting for the user to buy. So what would be the content? Like for this, for Instagram, it makes perfect sense because they're just photos. But for example, if you have like a catalog of items to sell, what would be the contents of preview? What do you guys think about that?
So what would be the contents of 3D if you had motives other than just showing pictures and videos? I think so. There's some details, more details than I can give in the Apple Human Interface Guidelines for 3D Touch. My 2 cents is that it should be a preview representation of the item that you touched on. You should really leave the full upscale of your view to the actual committed controller, the normal controller that you would look at when you would tap on an item. I would keep peek and pop as simple as possible. That being said, if you use the API the way the API says it should be used, you're actually previewing that full controller anyways. So if you go the custom controller route, or you just configure it a little bit different.
So can I do something like have images and then have some content which is more relevant for previewing, and then when you pop, you push that content down because that's since you already saw it in the preview.
Oh, that's interesting. So you look at a preview item. Say you're working on something that's in sales, and you preview something, you pop into it. Should you move that item? I would say from a design point of view, don't, because that's going to be really harsh, that transition, because you're looking at an item and you pop into it, and even if you use the built-in sort of spring animation, now you're going to spring into something different, which is going to be really bizarre and feel kind of weird, flashing, sort of flickering experience.
So if I want to really make it seamless, I'll have to build a custom.
Yeah.
Build out the entire custom thing.
Yep, pretty much. Yeah.
When peeking at items high on the screen, you get in this awkward situation where your hand is completely blocking what you're looking at, and you can't move your hand, or you have to slowly dredge it out of the way. Is that just a user problem, or is there app design that can be used to mitigate that?
Yeah, so if you peek items near the top of the screen, sort of a weird user experience because now your thumb's kind of covering up your screen. Yeah, no, that's just sort of the nature of the beast. I don't think that should, again, kind of harping on this idea that 3D Touch is like a little polish or an extra item on your app. I wouldn't try and design around that. Yeah, if you have content near the top of your app and you can peek on that content, it'll be kind of a weird experience, but that's just kind of how it is. Yeah.
Can you only implement peek without pop? So for instance, if I have a profile picture and I just want to have zoomed in, I don't want to make a separate view controller for only showing the image.
Yeah, can you do peek without pop? I don't believe you can. I believe that whatever controller you present for peeking, if you press harder and don't do anything, that controller is going to get pushed either onto your nav stack or presented modally. So yeah, you have to do something. With the way the API is built currently, you have to do
disable
something.
the pop.
Yeah, there's no way to opt out. I mean, you might be able to, like, as soon as it's presented, then pop. Oh man, that's weird. Pop and then pop. You might be able to, like, do that, but I think that would be a really bizarre experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you specify the size of that previewing controller that pops up?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. Can you specify the size of the previewing controller? So 2 things about that. Yes, you can. You override or set preferred content insets on your view controller that's peeked or previewed, but you can't animate that property. So for us, we originally had, we'll show all 6 thumbnail images of a user, and when we first present that user, we don't have a lot of data, so we make an API request to get those 6 images. If it comes back that the user is private, we would like resize it and shrink it. But that was really, really bizarre because you would press it, you would get this like big card, and then it would immediately just like, boom, no animation or anything. There's a radar open for that, so hopefully that'll come eventually, but pretty much just use the preferred content size, I think is the method.
So you can't animate the size, but you could still animate the content.
Yeah, so even though you can't interact with anything inside the view, you can totally animate. You can make you could present the card, show a spinner, make an API request, it comes back, get rid of the spinner, put a bunch of images or whatever you want inside that view. That's totally fine. You just can't tap on any of it. Yeah.
Can you use the magnitude for individually for each like element that you present with the 3D touch? For instance, like to view a user profile image, could you specify a certain magnitude?
Oh, so like so can you specify a certain magnitude? So like a some sort of threshold where like this guy's image you have to press at 20%, and for her image you have to press at 2% in order to activate it. That sort of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you set the magnitude really, really high, it would act like more of a zoom.
Yeah, only with a custom gesture could you do that, not with any of the built-in APIs. Yeah.
So when you set the preferred content size, can you set also sort of the X and Y of where it is, or is it going to be laid out in the center?
Can you set the X and Y of the peak? No. Yeah, you only can set the size, and the system is going to vertically and horizontally center. Actually, in fact, well, can't totally remember. You can set the size, and I know for sure you can change the height. The width there's a max. So you could set it to like 10,000, but it's going to set it to the screen size and inset maybe like 30 points or something like that. I don't know if you can make it shorter. I haven't played around with that. That would be kind of interesting. For sure you can change the height. I don't know the restrictions on the width. Anything else? Yeah?
Have you tried logging analytics of what UI elements are getting force touches that you aren't already handling?
Ooh, that's a great question. Have we been logging what people are force pressing that we don't have force press on? No, but I'm probably going to file a task so that we do that, because that's a really great idea. All right, thank you guys very much. I'll be hanging out for a little bit longer.